The worn leather of my armchair was a familiar comfort, a contour I had molded over countless quiet evenings. The book in my lap was a dense historical text, the kind that demands and rewards focus, and the afternoon light slanted through the bay window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the still air. This was my sanctuary, the heart of a home I had built and paid for with a lifetime of work. The silence was a companion, not an enemy. It was the quality of the silence breaking that first put me on alert. Not the cheerful jingle of my grandson letting himself in, not the tentative knock of a neighbor. This was the sharp, decisive turn of a key in the front door lock, my son Alexei's key, followed by the sound of multiple footsteps on the polished hardwood floor. Too many for a casual visit. They moved with a purpose that felt out of place in the gentle rhythm of my afternoon. Then she appeared in the archway of the living room, my daughter-in-law, Anya. She was framed there for a moment, not as a guest, but as an invader assessing her territory. Behind her, two men in stark, almost clinical white coats stood like sentinels. The sight was so jarring, so utterly out of context in my cozy living room with its shelves of books and family photographs, that for a single disorienting second I thought I was dreaming. The book felt heavy and foreign in my hands. Anya's face was a masterclass in manufactured concern. Her brow was furrowed just so, her lips pressed into a thin, sorrowful line. But her eyes, those cool, assessing eyes I had never fully trusted, gave her away. They scanned the room, my person, with a detached, analytical gleam that had nothing to do with worry and everything to do with appraisal. "Papa," she began, her voice a soft, syrupy poison. She only ever used that familial term when she wanted something. "I hope we are not disturbing you." She took a few steps into the room, forcing the two men to follow, their presence expanding to fill the space, making it feel small and suffocating. "I've been so terribly worried about you," she continued, her hands clasped in front of her as if in prayer. "Your state of mind lately, the confusion, the forgetfulness you've been showing, Alexei and we've been losing sleep over it." She paused, letting the weight of her lies hang in the air. I had shown no such thing. My mind, while perhaps slower to recall a name than it was 30 years ago, was as sharp and ordered as it had ever been. This was a narrative, a story she was constructing right in front of me. She gestured with a graceful, dismissive wave toward the two men. "So I've taken the liberty, out of love and concern, of course, to arrange for a little help. This is Dr. Orlov," she said, indicating the man on her right, "and his colleague. They're here from a very respected clinic to do an evaluation." Dr. Orlov, he was a man carved from ice. His face was a mask of professional neutrality, but his eyes were flat and empty, like two polished stones. He didn't smile, didn't nod in greeting. He simply looked at me as if I were a specimen already pinned to a board. "Mr. Volkov," he said, his voice a low, monotone drone that held no warmth, no empathy. "We are here to conduct a mandatory psychiatric assessment. Your daughter-in-law has provided us with a concerning account of your recent behavior, and given the potential risks, we are obligated to proceed." Mandatory. The word landed in the quiet room with the force of a physical blow. Obligated. My blood, which had been flowing calmly a moment before, seemed to slow and grow cold in my veins. This wasn't a suggestion. This wasn't a discussion. This was an ambush, a declaration. They were not asking for my permission. They were informing me of my new reality. The sheer, breathtaking disrespect of it all washed over me. It was absolute. It was public, staged in the one place that was supposed to be my refuge, my castle. They had walked into my home uninvited, and with a few polite, poisonous words, had attempted to strip me of my autonomy, my dignity, my very sanity. They were trying to declare me incompetent in my own living room, surrounded by the artifacts of my competent life. My hands remained perfectly still on the book in my lap, but inside, a deep, cold fury began to burn, quiet and focused. The hunter, long dormant, was suddenly, utterly awake. The quiet, I've found, is a thing you have to earn. It's not simply the absence of noise, it's a presence, a substance you can feel in the air, like the stillness in a forest just before the first snow. I've earned my quiet. After more than 40 years in the relentless machinery of the state prosecutor's office, this house, this routine, this predictable peace is my hard-won reward. My days have a gentle, unforced rhythm. I wake with the sun, not because I have to, but because I want to. The first light through the east-facing window of my bedroom paints a long golden rectangle on the hardwood floor. I make coffee, the ritual of grinding the beans a small, satisfying percussion in the morning hush. I sit in my favorite armchair, the one by the bay window that looks out over the garden, and I simply watch. I watch the robins hunt for worms. I watch the way the light changes on the leaves of the old oak tree. I don't need to be anywhere. I don't need to do anything. For the first time in my adult life, my time is entirely my own. My son, Alexei, is a good man. He has his father's drive, his ambition. He's built a successful import-export business, which means he's on a plane more often than he's in his own home. I'm proud of him, of the life he's made. He calls every Sunday evening without fail, his voice a little tired, a little distant, but always warm. He asks about my health, the garden, if I've been reading anything interesting. Our conversations are a comfortable, well-worn path. We don't talk about my work. We never have. To him, that part of my life is a closed book, a vague memory of a father who was often absent, buried in case files and witness statements. He has no idea what that work truly entailed. And then there is Anya, his wife. She has always been a polished, elegant creature, my daughter-in-law. From the beginning, there was a distance, a formality that never quite thawed. It was a civil coldness, the kind you accept in a relative you only see on holidays. She would compliment the house, ask polite questions about my roses, but her eyes would already be moving past me, assessing, calculating. Lately, however, that civil coldness has taken on a new, more active quality. The shift was subtle at first, almost imperceptible. It began with the questions. It was a few months ago, over one of her rare, dutiful visits. Alexei was away, as usual. She brought over a lemon cake, which she herself had not baked. We were sitting in the living room and she asked out of the blue, "Papa, have you given any more thought to your will?" I only ask because Alexei worries. You know, with him traveling so much, it's best to have these things in order. The question itself was reasonable. It was the phrasing, the slight emphasis on Alexei worries, that snagged my attention. It was a probe, disguised as concern. I gave her a non-committal answer, something about my lawyer having everything handled. The questions became a pattern. They were always cloaked in that same veneer of familial worry. "You seem a little tired lately, Papa. Are you sleeping well? I noticed you forgot to bring in the mail yesterday. Everything okay?" That's an interesting way to organize your books, by color instead of author. Quite eccentric. Eccentric. She began using that word a lot. My habit of taking a long, solitary walk every afternoon became your eccentric daily constitutional. My preference for listening to classical music instead of the television news was a charmingly old-fashioned quirk. She was building a lexicon, a vocabulary of gentle decline. She was painting a portrait, stroke by careful stroke, of a man becoming slightly unmoored from reality. I said nothing, I simply watched. I listened, because what Anya did not know, what she could not possibly have known, is that for the better part of 4 decades, my entire professional life was built on a single foundational skill. I know how to spot a lie. I wasn't a prosecutor who grandstanded in courtrooms. I was the one who built the stage they performed on. I was a senior legal investigator. My specialty was forensic evidence and, more importantly, witness credibility. I spent thousands of hours in dimly lit rooms, watching interview tapes, studying the micro-expressions that flicker across a person's face in the split second before they tell a falsehood. I learned to hear the subtle changes in vocal pitch, the carefully constructed sentences designed to omit a crucial fact, the rehearsed cadence of a fabricated story. I could deconstruct a person's testimony down to its constituent parts of truth, half-truth, and outright fiction. I knew how to build a case, brick by evidentiary brick, until the truth was the only possible conclusion. To me, Anya's new behavior was not a series of isolated, concerned comments. It was a pattern. It was a case file opening itself before my eyes. The increased frequency of her visits when Alexei was away. The specific probing nature of her questions about my finances and my health. The gradual insidious campaign to label my harmless routines as signs of cognitive slippage. I saw the strategy behind it. I recognized the methodology. And so, in my quiet, earned retirement, a different kind of quiet descended. The quiet of observation, the quiet of a predator, or perhaps more accurately, the quiet of a man who knows a trap is being laid around him. I continued my routines. I drank my coffee. I tended my garden. I took my walks. But behind my eyes, the old machinery, long dormant, was humming back to life. I was no longer just a retired man enjoying his peace. I was an investigator again, and the most important case of my life was beginning right in my own living room. It started small, so small I almost dismissed it as the ordinary friction of a shared household. But 30 years of sifting truth from lies had left me with an instinct, a low hum in the back of my mind that told me when a pattern was emerging. Anya's campaign began with my mail. It was a Tuesday, I remember, because my copy of The Economist always arrived on Tuesdays. It wasn't in the box. When I asked her if she'd seen it, she gave me a look of such gentle, practiced concern. "Oh, Papa," she'd said, using the affectionate term that suddenly felt like a veneer. "You brought it in yourself last night, don't you remember? You had it with your other letters." I knew with a cold certainty that I had not. I'd checked the box myself. It was empty. But I just nodded, a faint non-committal sound in my throat. The next week, it was a bank statement. The week after, a letter from an old colleague. Each time the story was the same. I'd already collected it. I was becoming forgetful. She was just so worried. She wasn't just hiding the mail. She was building a narrative, brick by brick, and she was using my own hands as the mortar. Then she took the campaign public. I'd walk to the end of the driveway to get the paper, and Mrs. Gable from across the street would give me a wave that was a little too hesitant, her smile a little too tight. One afternoon, she came over with a plate of cookies, something she hadn't done in years. "Anya mentioned you've been having a hard time lately," she said, her voice dripping with a pity that felt like acid. "She said you've been getting a little confused. We're all here for you, dear." I felt a hot flush of anger, but I kept my face a placid lake confused. She was telling my neighbors I was becoming senile. I thanked her for the cookies and went inside, my mind working, cataloguing. This was no longer just domestic annoyance. This was a character assassination in its early stages. The isolation came next. My phone, my tether to the world beyond these walls, grew quiet. My friend Leo, who called me every Friday evening like clockwork to dissect the week's political dramas, suddenly stopped. After 2 weeks of silence, I called him. His wife answered, her tone frosty. "Leo's busy," she said curtly, "and frankly, after what Anya told us about your agitation, we think it's best to give you some space." Agitation. Another carefully chosen word implying volatility, a lack of control. She was systematically severing my connections, making sure there would be no one to vouch for my sanity when the time came, no one to question her story. The wellness checks were the most audacious part, the point where her fiction began to wear an official badge. A woman from social services, kind-faced but with weary eyes, appeared on my doorstep one morning. She said they'd received an anonymous call expressing concern for an elderly gentleman living alone who was showing signs of self-neglect and paranoia. I invited her in, offered her tea. I was the picture of calm, lucid composure. I answered every question with precision. My mind, the tool I had honed over a lifetime, operating with cool, detached efficiency. I saw the confusion in her eyes. I didn't match the description she'd been given. She left with a polite smile and a promise that the file would be closed. But the stain of the visit remained. It was a shot across the bow, a demonstration of her reach. But the final straw, the one that broke through my professional detachment and struck the raw, vulnerable heart of a grandfather, was what she did with my grandson, little Sasha. With his 7-year-old's boundless energy and a laugh that could light up the darkest room. His weekly visits were the anchor of my life. Then, one Friday, Alexei called. His voice was strained, awkward. "Dad, Sasha's school. There's been a thing. They're suggesting that maybe, for now, his visits should be supervised. Just a rumor, of course, but we have to be careful." He couldn't even say it outright. The rumor, which I later pieced together from a furious, hushed call I made to a sympathetic parent I knew on the school board, was that I was unstable, that I had confused episodes, and that it wasn't safe for a child to be with me alone. That was the moment the net truly felt like it was closing. It wasn't just about my money, my house, my independence anymore. She was weaponizing my love for my own grandson. She was painting me as a danger to the person I cherished most in this world. The evaluation, whenever it was coming, was now a formality in her mind. She was creating the perfect prelude, a symphony of whispered lies and manufactured concerns, all designed to make me look exactly like the unstable, paranoid old man she needed me to be for her final clinical coup. The stage was set, and she was confident I was just a helpless prop. But she had forgotten who I used to be. She had forgotten that a man who has spent his life in the shadows, learning how others lie, is never truly helpless. He is just waiting. It was the silence that first caught my attention. The house, usually filled with the distant hum of the television or the soft clatter of Anya moving about the kitchen, had gone still. It was a heavy, waiting kind of silence, the kind that settles just before a storm breaks. I was in my study, a room that had always been my sanctuary, surrounded by the leather-bound ghosts of my past, legal texts, case files from a lifetime of work. I was reading a particularly dense treatise on forensic document analysis, not for work, but for the simple, comforting familiarity of it. The logic was a balm against the creeping, formless anxiety that Anya had been seeding around me for weeks. I had just turned a page, the sound unnaturally loud in the hush. When I heard it, a voice, muffled but close. It came from the hallway just outside my closed door. It was Anya's voice, but stripped of the saccharine, concerned tone she used with me. This was lower, sharper, a blade being quietly unsheathed. I didn't move. I simply stopped breathing, my entire being focusing on the sound leaking through the solid oak of the door. No, he suspects nothing. A pause. I could picture her, one hand cupped around her phone, the other gesturing in that dismissive way she had. He's just a confused old man puttering in his study. He thinks his books will save him. My fingers, resting on the aged paper of the book, went cold. A confused old man. The words were so casual, so utterly contemptuous. Then came the part that changed everything, the part that turned the vague, unsettling shape of her campaign into a sharp, undeniable blueprint. "Tomorrow it's done," she said, and her voice dipped into a hushed, triumphant whisper that carried a vile kind of joy. "Once he's declared incompetent, we control everything, the house, the investments, all of it. It's a clean sweep." The air left my lungs. It wasn't a surprise, not really. The misplaced mail, the whispered concerns to the neighbors, the sudden patronizing wellness checks. They were all pieces of a puzzle I'd been trying not to see. But hearing it laid out so brazenly, with such cold-blooded certainty, was like a physical blow. This wasn't just disrespect. This was a hostile takeover of my life, my mind, my very autonomy. Her next words were a meticulous instruction, a director coaching her actor. "Just remember the script. Paranoia, confusion about dates. Make it convincing. Tell Orlov to emphasize the disorientation. The more erratic he seems, the better." The script. Make it convincing. In that single suspended moment, something inside me broke. But it wasn't a break into pieces. It was a breakthrough. It was the final definitive click of a lock sliding home or a safety being switched off. The years of quiet retirement fell away like a discarded coat. The man sipping tea and reading in his armchair vanished. In his place was the investigator I had been for over 4 decades, the man who knew that evidence was the only truth that mattered in a world of lies. The cold in my fingers spread up my arms, but it wasn't the chill of fear. It was the cold, clean focus of a predator who has just identified its prey. The vague unease crystallized into a hard, sharp purpose. I was no longer the observed, I was no longer the patient, the father-in-law, the potential victim. In the deep quiet of my study, with the scent of old books and polish in the air, I became the actor, the hunter. I looked around the room, and it was no longer just a library. It was a battlefield. The heavy desk was a command post. The books were archives of precedent and strategy. The silence was no longer oppressive, it was tactical. She thought I was just a confused old man puttering with his books. She had no idea that those books had taught me how to dismantle lies far more sophisticated than hers. She was following a script. I was about to write the final act. The transition was absolute. The part of me that had hoped for a misunderstanding, that had clung to the frayed threads of family loyalty, was extinguished. All that remained was a clear, cold path forward. The game was on, and she had just carelessly revealed her entire hand. She had made one catastrophic miscalculation. She had mistaken my silence for senility and my patience for weakness. She never considered that the most dangerous animal is the one you've already written off as tame. The hunt was beginning, and she was blissfully unaware that she was no longer the hunter. The silence after she hung up was louder than any sound I'd ever heard. It was a physical presence in my study, thick and heavy, pressing in on me from all sides. I didn't move. I stood there in the dim light. The grandfather clock in the hall ticking off seconds that felt like individual heartbeats. Anya's voice, that hushed, triumphant tone, was still echoing in the hollows of my mind. "Tomorrow it's done. Once he's declared incompetent, we control everything." And in that crushing silence, something shifted. It wasn't anger. Anger is a hot, messy thing. This was cold. This was clarity. It was like a key turning in a lock I hadn't opened in decades. A door swung open in my mind and a ghost stepped out. His name was Gregor, my old mentor from the prosecutor's office. A man with a face like a worn leather map and eyes that missed nothing. I could see him as clearly as if he were standing in front of my bookshelf, swirling a glass of cheap brandy. He never raised his voice. He never had to. "Evidence is the truth, Pyotr." His voice, gravelly and sure, filled the silence in my head. "And the truth is a weapon. Never draw it in anger. Wait until it is sharp enough to cut with a whisper. For weeks I had been the observer. I had watched Anya's little play unfold, noting her moves like a chess game I was only half invested in. The misplaced mail, the whispered concerns to the neighbors, the isolation. I had seen it all, catalogued it, but a part of me, the foolish, hopeful part, kept thinking it would stop, that she would remember I was family, that she would remember I was the man who had built a career on seeing through lies far more sophisticated than hers. Hearing her on that phone, the casual cruelty, the sheer avarice. That was the click. The observer was gone. The actor was back. I was not a helpless old man pottering around his house, waiting for the end. That was the costume she saw. The reality was something else entirely. I was a hunter, and my quarry had just walked right into my sights, arrogant and blind. My plan didn't form in steps. It unfolded in my mind as a single, complete picture, a blueprint pulled from a dusty cabinet in my memory. It was built from whispers and fragments, just like the old days. A witness statement here, a financial record there, a pattern of behavior that didn't fit the narrative. I had spent 35 years building cases from less. This was no different. The crime was conspiracy. The motive was greed. The weapon was to be a piece of paper signed by a corrupt doctor. But they had chosen the wrong man to frame. They thought my mind was as cluttered and frail as this old house. They didn't know it was a library, meticulously organized, with a special section reserved for predators. I walked to my desk, my movements calm and deliberate. No panic, no frantic searching. I opened the bottom left drawer, the one with the false back I had crafted myself years ago for documents I didn't want my late wife to accidentally find. Behind it, in a slim, felt-lined case, were my tools. 3 of them. High-definition, voice-activated cameras, no bigger than a shirt button. State-of-the-art, a world away from the clunky equipment we used to have. I had bought them online the day my suspicions first truly crystallized. After that, wellness check from social services felt a little too rehearsed. A hunch, an old investigator's instinct. I had discreetly installed them the previous afternoon while Anya was out shopping, spending my pension on God knows what. One in the living room, nestled in the intricate carving of the old oak mantelpiece. One in the hallway, tucked behind the frame of a landscape painting. And one right here in my study, hidden in the dark hollow of a bookshelf pointed directly at my favorite armchair, the chair where I was meant to sit and display my paranoia and confusion for the doctors. I held one of the tiny devices in my palm. It was cool and inert, a silent witness. This was my truth. This was my weapon. Gregor would have approved. He always said the best traps were the ones the prey never saw, the ones they built for themselves with their own arrogance. Anya and her doctor thought they were coming to conduct an evaluation. They were wrong. They were walking onto a crime scene, my crime scene, and I was the lead investigator, the sole witness, and the judge. The trial would be held in this very room tomorrow, and I had already ensured the verdict. The morning light was thin and grey, the kind that promised nothing. I had slept little, but I felt no fatigue. There is a strange electric clarity that comes when you know you are about to go to war. I dressed with the same deliberate care I had used for 30 years before heading to the courthouse, a simple pressed shirt, trousers, sturdy shoes. An uniform of sorts. I was not dressing for my daughter-in-law's little theatre production. I was dressing for my own. I moved through the quiet house, a ghost in my own home. Every object, every photograph felt like an exhibit in a case I was about to close. I made a pot of coffee, the rich, dark scent a familiar anchor. I did not drink it. I stood by the window in my study, watching the empty street. They would be here soon. Anya with her performative concern, and the men in white coats, her hired actors. The stage was set, the script written. They just didn't know I had rewritten the final act. My plan was not complex. It was a single precise action, like the turn of a key in a lock. Complexity breeds error. Simplicity is a blade. I picked up the landline phone from my desk. Its weight was solid, reassuring. In my hand, it was not a phone. It was a detonator. I dialed a number I had not called in over a year, a number etched into my memory as deeply as my own. It rang twice. "Mikhail," a familiar, brisk voice answered. "It's Pyotr," I said. My voice was calm, flat. There was no need for pleasantries. We were both men who understood the value of time, especially when it was running out. There was a slight pause on the other end, a beat of surprise quickly suppressed. "Sir, it's good to hear your voice, but this is not a social call, I assume." "It is not," I confirmed. "I have a situation, a legal matter of a personal nature." I laid it out for him with the dispassionate efficiency of a field report. Anya, the orchestrated campaign of isolation, the impending psychiatric evaluation designed to declare me incompetent. I did not embellish. I did not plead. I presented the facts. He listened in silence, a skill he had learned from me. When I finished, he let out a low, slow breath. "Anya," he said, the single word laden with a cold disgust I knew well. "She always was ambitious. But this is stupidity." "It is," I agreed. "And it is almost successful. They will be here within the hour." "What do you need?" he asked. It was the same question he had asked me 100 times as a young, hungry investigator in my charge. "I need you to intervene, to be my legal counsel, officially." "Of course. I will leave now. I can be there in 25 minutes. "There is one more thing," I said, my eyes drifting to the small, almost invisible lens integrated into the bookshelf. "I have evidence. Audio and video, high definition. I recorded her conversation with the lead doctor, a man named Orlov, last night. They were discussing the script for my paranoia and the division of my assets." The silence on the other end of the line was different this time. It was the silence of a master craftsman appreciating a perfect tool. "You recorded them," he repeated, a note of profound, grim satisfaction in his voice. "Of course you did. I am not the forgetful old man she believes me to be, Mikhail." "No, sir," he said, and I could hear the ghost of a smile. "You are the man who taught me that the best evidence is the kind your enemy delivers to you themselves. I am on my way. Do not say a word unto them until I arrive. Let them set the stage. We will just be changing the play." I hung up the phone. The deed was done. The single precise action was complete. I felt a stillness settle over me, the calm at the center of the storm. I poured a cup of the coffee I had made and finally took a sip. It was strong, bitter, and perfect. I did not have to wait long. I heard a car door shut, then another. Through the window I saw Anya's sedan and a second, anonymous sedan. She got out, smoothing her dress, her face a mask of somber duty. Behind her, 2 men emerged, both in crisp white coats. Dr. Orlov, tall and severe, and a younger, quieter colleague. The pawns were in position. I remained in my study, listening as Anya used her key to let them in. I heard her voice, pitched with a syrupy false concern. "He's usually in the living room at this time. I'm so worried. His confusion has been profound." I waited. I listened to their footsteps on the hardwood floor. I heard Dr. Orlov's low, authoritative voice begin his rehearsed lines. "Mr. Volkov, my name is Dr. Orlov. We're here to help you." That was my cue. I did not move. I simply waited. And then, right on schedule, another car door slammed outside, sharp and decisive. Quick, confident footsteps approached the front door. The doorbell rang, a clear, commanding sound that cut through Dr. Orlov's monologue. I heard Anya's flustered, "Who could that be?" I walked out of my study just as she opened the door. Mikhail stood there, impeccable in a dark, tailored suit, a leather briefcase in one hand. He looked every inch the city's most formidable defense attorney, which he was. His gaze swept past a startled Anya, past the two doctors, and landed on me. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Good morning," he said, his voice filling the entryway with an easy authority that immediately dwarfed Dr. Orlov's. "My name is Mikhail Sokolov. I am Mr. Volkov's legal counsel." He then turned his attention directly to the two men in white coats, his expression neutral, but his eyes sharp and assessing. "Dr. Orlov, I presume. Before this evaluation proceeds any further, I must insist on a brief, private word with you and your colleague. It pertains to a matter of legal and professional protocol." The trap was sprung. The countermove was complete. All that was left was the revelation. The silence in my study was thick enough to taste, a heavy, metallic flavor of anticipation. I stood by the window, my back to the three men, watching a sparrow peck at the lawn. I didn't need to watch the screen. I had already seen the footage, had already heard the damning audio. I had lived with the knowledge of it for the last 24 hours, a cold stone in my gut. Now it was their turn to feel its weight. Mikhail, my old protégé, was a study in quiet control. He didn't speak. He simply pressed play on the laptop, the screen angled so that Dr. Orlov and his younger, quieter colleague had a perfect view. The first clip was from the camera in the hallway, just 2 days prior. There was Anya, my daughter-in-law, her face not the mask of concerned sympathy she wore for public consumption, but sharp and animated. And there was Dr. Orlov, the man who was supposed to be a bastion of professional impartiality, leaning against my wall as if he owned the place. Their voices, captured in pristine, high-definition clarity, filled the room. "He's been particularly confused this week," Anya was saying, but her tone was all business, a project manager delivering a status report. "Keeps forgetting what day it is. I found him talking to a photograph of his late wife for almost an hour yesterday." Dr. Orlov gave a soft, dismissive chuckle. "Classic indicators. Don't worry, the script is solid. We'll document the disorientation, the paranoia about his mail being stolen. It all fits the profile for early-stage dementia we discussed." Then came the part that made my jaw tighten, even now. Anya's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper, but the microphone in the hallway sconce missed nothing. "An hour arrangement? You're certain the court will grant me conservatorship? Once my evaluation is submitted, it's a mere formality," Orlov replied smoothly. "My colleague and I are in complete agreement. An hour share, as we discussed. 15% of the liquidated assets seems more than fair for this level of professional risk. 15% of several million is more than fair for a few hours of paperwork and a convincing performance," Anya said, a note of greedy triumph in her voice that made me feel physically ill. This was the woman who ate at my table, who I called family. The video cut to a second clip, this one from the living room camera, taken just last night. They were standing right where the performance was meant to take place today. Dr. Orlov was swirling a glass of my brandy that Anya must have given him. "The old man's ramblings are almost amusing," Orlov said, taking a sip. "He was trying to tell me some story about his time as an investigator. Something about a forged signature, quite delusional." Anya laughed, a cold, brittle sound. "Oh, he lives in the past. It's all he has left. Just stick to the script. Paranoia, confusion, agitation. Make it convincing." I heard a sharp, choked gasp from behind me. I didn't turn. I kept my eyes on the sparrow, which had now flown away. The audio stopped. Mikhail didn't say a word. He simply let the silence do the work for him, let the damning evidence hang in the air. solid and undeniable. I finally turned around. The transformation in Dr. Orlov was absolute. The cold clinical authority he had marched into my home with was gone. His face was the color of old parchment, a sickly, washed-out grey. Beads of sweat dotted his forehead above his perfectly trimmed eyebrows. His hands, which had been so sure of themselves when holding his clipboard, were now trembling slightly. His younger colleague looked like he wanted to be anywhere else in the world, his eyes wide with horror, staring at his senior as if he'd never seen him before. This can be explained," Orlov stammered, his voice a dry rasp, but the words were hollow, the plea of a man who knew the game was over. Mikhail finally spoke, his voice low and lethally calm. "It can be explained to the medical board and to the district attorney. Conspiracy to commit fraud, subornation of perjury, the illegal attempt to gain control of an elderly person's estate. The list is long, Doctor, and this recording is entered into evidence." That was the final blow. Orlov's shoulders slumped. The fight drained out of him completely. He looked from Mikhail's implacable face to mine, and in my eyes he saw no senile confusion, only the cold, patient focus of the legal investigator I once was. He saw the hunter. I was coerced," he whispered, a pathetic attempt to salvage a shred of his career. "She was very persuasive. The money, I confess, it was a scheme. There is no basis for an evaluation. The patient he is clearly of sound mind." Mikhail gave a curt single nod. "Good, you will come with me now, and you will say exactly that to the woman waiting in the living room. You will recant. You will state the facts, and then you will leave this house and pray we do not decide to pursue this further." The walk from my study to the living room felt like the longest march of my life. Mikhail led, a predator shepherding his prey. The two doctors followed, Orlov looking broken, his colleague looking utterly mortified. I brought up the rear, a silent observer to the final act of the play I had directed. Anya was exactly where we had left her, perched on the edge of the sofa. She had a small, smug, almost imperceptible smile on her face, the look of someone who believes they have already won. Her eyes flicked from Mikhail to me, expecting to see fear, confusion. She saw nothing but calm. Then her gaze landed on Dr. Orlov, and the smile froze. The doctor wouldn't meet her eyes. He stared at a point on the carpet, his voice barely audible at first, then gaining a shred of desperate strength. "There will be no evaluation today," he stated. He cleared his throat. This entire proceeding is based on fraudulent pretenses." Anya's face went through a rapid, terrifying series of transformations. The smugness shattered into pure, uncomprehending confusion. Then, as the meaning of his words sank in, confusion curdled into dawning horror. Her eyes, wide and frantic, darted to me, to Mikhail, and back to Orlov. "What are you talking about?" she hissed, her voice tight with panic. "Doctor, we had an agreement." "The agreement is void," Mikhail interjected, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. "The evidence of your conspiracy has been documented." And then I saw it. The collapse. It wasn't a slow crumbling. It was a sudden, catastrophic implosion. The color drained from Anya's face so completely she looked like a ghost. Her carefully constructed composure disintegrated. Her jaw went slack, her eyes wide with a terror so profound it seemed to swallow her whole. Her entire world, the house, the money, the future she had so meticulously plotted and stolen for, vanished in that single silent moment of realization. She wasn't looking at a confused old man anymore. She was looking at the architect of her ruin. And in her eyes, I saw the utter and complete collapse of everything she was. The silence that settled over the house after the door closed behind Mikhail and the two disgraced doctors was of a different quality than any I had known before. It wasn't the quiet of solitude or peace. It was the heavy, ringing silence that follows an explosion. The air itself felt charged, thick with the residue of a shattered reality. I stood in the center of the living room, the same room where, just hours before, Anya had staged her little coup, and I simply breathed. The high-definition camera, hidden in the clock on the mantelpiece, was still. Its work was done. I didn't touch a thing. I left the chairs where they were, the half-empty water glasses on the coasters. This was my crime scene now, and I was preserving it for the one witness who mattered most. I made myself a pot of strong tea, my hands steady, my movements deliberate. There was no rage, no triumphant glee. There was only a profound, bone-deep sorrow and the cold, clear focus of a man who has one last, painful duty to perform. The key turned in the front door just after 7. I heard Alexei's familiar, weary sigh as he dropped his briefcase, the shuffle of his shoes on the mat. "Papa," he called out, his voice laced with a concern that was now tragically ironic. "I got your text. Is everything all right? Anya said you were agitated today." I was waiting for him in his favorite armchair, facing the door. "Come in, Alexei," I said, my voice calm, level. "We need to talk." He came into the room, his tie loosened, his face etched with the long day. He took in the scene, the extra chairs, the glasses, and a flicker of confusion crossed his features. "What's all this? Did you have company?" In a manner of speaking, I said. I gestured to the sofa opposite me. "Sit down." He did, leaning forward, his elbows on his knees, the picture of a patient, if slightly worried, son. "Anya called me. She said some doctors came by, that you were resistant. Papa, if you're not feeling well." "Anya lied, Alexei," I said, cutting him off gently but firmly. "Hey." The words hung in the air, simple and absolute. He blinked. "What? No, Papa. She's just concerned. She said—" "I know what she said. I also know what she did." I reached for the small digital audio recorder Mikhail had left with me, a copy of the damning evidence. "I want you to listen to something, the whole thing. Do not speak until it is finished." I pressed play. The recording was pristine. It began with a hushed, conspiratorial conversation I had overheard from my study. Anya's voice, clear and venomous, plotting with Dr. Orlov. "Once he's declared incompetent, we control. Everything, make it convincing." Then it shifted to the living room, capturing the entire grotesque performance. Her feigned sorrow, the doctor's cold, clinical disrespect, my own measured responses. And then the climax, the private meeting in my study, where Mikhail confronted them with the video. We heard Dr. Orlov's voice, stripped of its professional authority, cracking with panic as he confessed to the entire scheme, detailing the financial split, their laughter at my expense. We heard Anya's voice on the phone, confirming it all. I watched my son's face as the recording played. I saw the initial confusion harden into disbelief, then shatter into a raw, gut-wrenching horror. The color drained from his cheeks, his hands, which had been clasped, slowly uncurled, his fingers trembling. When Anya's voice, so familiar and yet now a stranger's, laughed about my senile ramblings, a single choked sob escaped him. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. The man I had raised, the boy I had taught to ride a bike, was being unmade in front of me by the woman he loved. The recording ended. The silence returned, this time broken by his ragged breathing. He looked up at me, his eyes red-rimmed and swimming in a pain so profound it was a physical presence in the room. "Papa, I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know." His voice was a broken whisper. All those times she said she was worried. The mail, the neighbors. I believed her. I thought I was protecting you. "I know you did, son," I said, my own heart feeling like a stone in my chest. That was the point of her design. She used your love for me as her primary weapon." The devastation on his face then curdled into something else, something dark and furious. A father's rage. I recognized it. It was the same fire that had burned in me. He stood up, pacing the room like a caged animal. "Where is she?" he growled, his voice trembling with a fury I had never heard from him. "She is upstairs," I said calmly. "Waiting for your return, I assume, to hear the good news of my capitulation." "I'll throw her out right now," he seethed, turning toward the hallway. "Stop!" My voice was not loud, but it carried the full weight of my authority, the tone I'd used in courtrooms for decades. He froze. "We do not act in anger, Alexei. We act with precision. We have the evidence. We have the law on our side. We have already won. Now we dictate the terms of her surrender." I laid it out for him, the plan Mikhail and I had formulated, the ultimatum. She would leave this house tonight. She would voluntarily separate from him. She would sign a comprehensive post-nuptial agreement prepared by Mikhail that forfeited any and all future claims to my estate and placed severe restrictions on any claim to their marital assets, essentially leaving her with nothing but the clothes on her back. In return, we would not file a criminal complaint for conspiracy, fraud, and attempted elder abuse, charges that would see her and her doctor accomplices facing prison time. "It is merciful," I said, "more than she deserves." He nodded slowly, the fury receding, replaced by a grim, cold resolve. "She'll choose to leave. She's a coward." We went upstairs together. Anya was in their bedroom, pretending to read. She looked up, a smug, expectant smile already forming on her lips. "Alexei, darling, how was your—" The smile died when she saw his face. It was a mask of cold contempt. He didn't shout. He didn't accuse. He simply stated the facts, his voice flat and final. He told her we knew everything. He told her about the recording. He laid out the ultimatum. As he spoke, I watched the blood drain from her face, her carefully constructed composure crumbling into sheer, unadulterated terror. She looked from him to me, her eyes wide with the realization that her game was not just lost, but that she had been playing against a grandmaster all along. She tried to speak, to lie, to plead, but Alexei cut her off. "There is nothing to discuss. Pack a bag. You have 1 hour." She chose to leave. There were no dramatics, no final cutting words. The fight had gone out of her completely. She moved through the room like a ghost, stuffing a suitcase with trembling hands, avoiding our eyes. When she was done, she paused at the bedroom door, looking back at my son. There was a plea in her eyes, a last desperate hope for a fragment of the man she had betrayed. He turned his back on her. I heard the front door close a final time. The sound echoed through the quiet house. Alexei stood staring out the window into the darkening street. His shoulders slumped. I walked over and placed a hand on his back. He didn't turn around, but he leaned into the touch, a boy seeking comfort from his father. "It's over," I said softly. He took a deep, shuddering breath. "No, Papa," he whispered, his voice thick with grief. "For me, I think it's only just beginning." The silence in the house these days is a different kind of quiet. It's not the heavy, waiting silence that used to sit in the corners before Anya would arrive with her false concern and her sharp, calculating eyes. This silence is full. It's the quiet of a page finally turned, of a storm that has passed and left clean, calm air in its wake. Months have drifted by, each one layering a little more peace over the memory of that single, terrible day. The house is truly mine again. Every book on the shelf, every photograph on the mantel, they exist without the shadow of someone plotting to take them away. I can sit in my favorite armchair by the window, the one she always said was shabby and needed replacing, and feel not a shred of self-doubt, only a deep, settled comfort. Alexei and my grandson Leo are here most Sundays. The sound of the front door opening is no longer a trigger for my pulse to quicken. It's a welcome signal. I hear Leo's laughter first, a bright, uncomplicated sound that seems to scrub the very walls clean. He'll run in, often with a drawing or some new fact about dinosaurs he's eager to share, and he'll climb onto the arm of my chair without a hint of the caution Anya tried to instill in him. That perhaps is the greatest victory, the restoration of his simple, trusting love. Alexei follows, usually carrying a bag of pastries. There's a new gravity to him, a sorrow that I know will take a long time to fade. But there's also a profound gratitude in his eyes when he looks at me. We don't talk about what happened directly, not in front of Leo, but it's there, in the careful way he asks how I'm sleeping, in the extra moment he takes to make sure I have everything I need. The conspiracy sought to drive a wedge between us, to make him see me as a burden. Instead, it reforged our bond in a fire of shared betrayal and survival. Once every couple of weeks, I meet Mikhail for coffee at a small, unassuming place downtown. He always gets there first, a stack of files already beside him, but he pushes them aside when I arrive. Our conversations are a strange and comforting mix of the past and the present. He'll tell me about his current cases, the intricate webs of lies and greed he has to untangle for his clients. And sometimes, with a wry smile, he'll lean forward and say, "You know, I have this story I tell people, anonymously, of course." He'll then recount the tale of the retired investigator and the daughter-in-law who tried to have him declared incompetent. He uses it as a lesson, a stark reminder that the most dangerous predators don't always look the part, and that the best defense is often a well-prepared mind. Hearing him tell it is like looking at a photograph of a battle I once fought. The memory is sharp, but the immediate danger is gone, replaced by the solid understanding of why we won. The hidden cameras are packed away in a box in the attic. I have no need for them anymore. Their purpose was served in that one critical moment. But their absence doesn't mean I've let my guard down entirely. The lesson they represented is now a permanent part of my worldview. Anya made a fatal miscalculation. She saw an old man living a quiet life and mistook it for weakness. She saw a mind that was no longer occupied with the high-stakes drama of the prosecutor's office and assumed it had gone soft. She never accounted for the fact that the skills I honed over a lifetime, patience, observation, the methodical building of a case, were not things I had lost. They were simply lying in wait, like tools in a shed, ready to be picked up and used with the same precision as always. My mind was, and remains, my greatest asset. It was the one fortress she never thought to besiege, and in the end, it was the very thing that protected everything I hold dear. The peace I have now wasn't given to me, it was reclaimed, and that makes it all the more valuable. People look at a quiet man in his late 60s, living alone in a comfortable house, and they see a story that's already been written. They see the final chapter. They see a life winding down, a mind slowing, a person becoming less. They see a target. They see weakness. Anya saw that. She saw the quiet and mistook it for emptiness. She saw the age and mistook it for decay. She saw a man who enjoyed his garden and his books and his solitude, and she thought she saw a sheep ready for the shearing. It's a common, fatal error. The world often mistakes quiet for weakness and age for decline. But a lion does not forget how to hunt. The instincts don't vanish just because the savannah has been traded for a suburban backyard. The muscles might not be as taut, the sprint not as fast, but the eyes still see everything. The mind still calculates the wind, the distance, the angle of attack, the patience born from 1,000 stakeouts and a lifetime of waiting for the truth to reveal itself, that remains. It is a deep humming presence, a part of your very marrow. You don't lose the craft of a lifetime. You simply put the tools away, and you always remember where you stored them. For 35 years, my world was evidence. It was a fingerprint on a glass, a hesitation in a testimony, a pattern in a sequence of events that didn't quite fit. My job was to find the truth hidden in the noise, to build a case from fragments that others overlooked. I wasn't a prosecutor in a flashy suit giving closing arguments. I was the one in the back room, under the fluorescent lights, connecting the dots, until a picture emerged that could not be denied. That was my hunt. That was my nature. And when the threat came, it wasn't from a stranger in a dark alley. It came on soft feet, wearing a smile, carrying a cup of tea and a lie. It came from within my own den, and the moment I heard that click on the phone, the moment the pieces of her campaign of whispers and misplaced mail and concerned looks snapped into a single terrifying picture, the lion woke up, not with a roar, but with a slow, deliberate uncoiling. The hunt was on. This is the lesson I want to leave with you. Protect your peace. Cherish the quiet mornings, the simple routines, the hard-won tranquility of a life lived. Build a fortress of calm around your soul, but never, ever disarm your mind in the process. Do not mistake peace for passivity. Do not mistake kindness for naivete. Your past strengths are your present shields. Every skill you've ever honed, every hardship you've ever endured, every battle you've ever fought, they are not just memories in a scrapbook. They are layers of armor. They are weapons in a hidden armory. For me, it was the meticulous mind of an investigator. For you, it might be the resilience you built surviving a difficult childhood, the negotiation skills you mastered in business, the sheer stubborn will you developed overcoming an illness. These are not relics. They are your defenses, waiting to be called upon. I set a trap with the only tools I had left, my foresight and my knowledge of human deceit. The cameras were just the physical manifestation of a mind that had never stopped working, that had never accepted a narrative at face value. I didn't fight her with shouting or fists. I fought her with the very thing she was trying to discredit, my mind. I let her walk into the story she had written for me, and I simply provided the evidence that proved it was a fiction. Stay vigilant. This does not mean living in paranoia. It does not mean trusting no one. It means trusting your instincts. It means listening to that small, cold voice that tells you when something is wrong, even when everything on the surface looks right. It means understanding that threats don't always come with a warning label. Sometimes they come with a marriage certificate and a concerned smile. My peace was almost stolen from me. It was taken back not by brute force, but by a sharper mind and a longer memory. He, the quiet man in the garden, was and always will be the hunter in the long grass. Remember that. Nurture your peace, but keep your tools sharp. Your mind is the greatest weapon you will ever own. Do not let the world convince you to lay it down.